Welcome to this short and effective guide on the bishop's opening, an easy-to-learn yet tricky strategy for your opponents to handle. This opening begins with the moves pawn to e4 followed by pawn to e5, setting the stage for an aggressive and dynamic game. By moving your bishop to c4 on the second move, you immediately disrupt your opponent's typical opening plans. Most players expect knight to f3, which follows well-known classical opening principles. However, by choosing to develop your bishop instead, you directly target a potentially weak square while setting up numerous tactical traps that can catch your opponent off guard. In most cases, your opponent will proceed by developing their kingside knight, attacking your central pawn on e4. But this is where you introduce another unexpected move, pawn to d4, counterattacking their central control and creating immediate tension on the board. For an unprepared opponent, this sudden shift can be difficult to handle. They will likely respond by capturing either the pawn on d4 or the pawn on e4, and some may attempt to reinforce their position by developing another knight. We will explore all these possible responses in detail. Let's begin with the most natural response. Your opponent captures the pawn on a4 as part of their original plan. They develop their kingside knight to attack your central pawn, and since you haven't defended it, they proceed to take it. However, after pawn captures on e5, your opponent is already on unstable ground, and a small mistake can quickly lead to disaster. For instance, if they develop their queenside knight, the strategic ideas behind the bishop's opening come into play with a well-known bishop sacrifice. This tactical theme is a common pattern in this opening. Once the king is forced to move, you follow up by activating your queen, preparing to regain your material in the next move. Not only do you recover your piece, but you also leave the opponent's king completely exposed, eliminating their ability to castle and gaining a strong initiative. At this stage, many opponents will pause to think about their next move. Some may attempt to counterattack immediately by pushing pawn to d5, trying to challenge your center and fight back. At this moment, your opponent might feel confident, believing they have successfully reinforced their knight on e4 while also restricting your bishop. However, what they don't realize is that after you capture with bishop takes d5, they are on a direct path to making a critical mistake. Not only have they already lost a pawn, but since your bishop is defended, they cannot recapture it. Additionally, their knight on e4 is now under attack, and if they decide to retreat it, you have another brilliant tactical opportunity. Bishop takes f7. This time, the sacrifice serves a different purpose, luring out the king so you can capture the queen on di8. If black stubbornly tries to hold on to their defensive setup, it still doesn't work. By playing bishop to g5, you maintain your advantage and force them into a losing position. The most common mistake black makes in this position is playing bishop to c5, attempting a double attack on your pawn on f2. However, you can neutralize this threat with a triple counterattack, completely overwhelming your opponent. The main threat that now dominates the board is queen takes f7, delivering checkmate in just one move. Black's knight on e4 is under attack, and if it moves, their bishop on c5 will be captured. They might try an in-between check with bishop takes f2, but after your king moves, they still face the same problems, mainly the checkmate threat. As they scramble to defend, you simply capture their knight, and now their bishop is also hanging. Beyond losing material, black's position is collapsing as you maintain relentless pressure. You can freely develop your bishop or knight, gaining even more control. For some reason, the most common move black plays here is pawn to c6, likely preparing for a future move, but it doesn't change the outcome. You can confidently continue with bishop to d3, launching one of my favorite variations in the bishop's opening, where checkmate becomes an immediate threat. You play bishop to g5, forcing the queen to move, then follow up with bishop to f6, setting up a quick checkmate by bringing your queen to g7. Black tries pawn to d5, but it doesn't help. You continue with queen to h4, still threatening mate. As they attempt to block, you sacrifice relentlessly, capturing pawn on h5. After knight to g5, despite being up a queen, black is completely helpless. So far, we've covered what happens when they capture one central pawn. Next, we'll examine the more common alternative. Plus, I'll address how to handle less optimal moves from your opponents. Let's discuss one of the less optimal responses, knight to c6, attempting to defend the pawn. Instead of capturing, which would only help black centralize their knight, you push pawn to d5, gaining space and forcing their knight to retreat. If they try to stay active with knight to d4, then pawn to c3 quickly wins the knight. Now, let's look at a game that showcases the attacking power of the bishop's opening. This was played in the Las Vegas National Open, featuring a 2,200 rated white against a 2,100 rated black. The game continues with pawn to c6, preparing to control the center, followed by knight to a3. Black plays pawn to d5, a common response to the bishop's opening. White retreats the light-squared bishop, while black must still be cautious about the pawn on e5. Black continues with bishop to b4, delivering a check, but then retreats to d6 to defend the pawn. After knight to c3, white keeps applying pressure with simple, natural moves. Expecting an exchange, black trades the central pawn, assuming white will immediately recapture. However, white instead plays knight to g5, targeting the pawn on f7. Only after black castles does white recapture on e4, now activating multiple pieces toward black's position. Black tries to stabilize with bishop to e7, hoping to x-ray the knight. After a trade, white reinforces the knight with a pawn, making black's position increasingly uncomfortable. Black then plays queen to e7, likely attempting to overprotect a key square. White plays queen to h5, threatening checkmate. Black exchanges on g5, but this opens the h-file. Black now has to defend the king and plays bishop to f5 to protect the pawn. White castles queenside, while black responds with pawn to a5, aiming for a counterattack. In the actual game, white played pawn to a3 and eventually won, though they missed a brilliant opportunity to end the game right there, using the power of the bishop. The key move was pawn to g4, and while it may seem risky, since black could play bishop to g6 and gain tempo, white could have responded with a stunning queen sacrifice. After black recaptures, they can't take with the f-pawn due to a pin, so they are forced to capture with another piece. White then places their rooks along the h-file and delivers checkmate. Though the plan is clear, it takes white a few moves to execute it, and black is completely defenseless. There's nothing black can do against this attack, and it all hinges on the pawn on f7 being pinned by white's bishop. This bishop, even from a distance, is playing a crucial role. Without it, black could simply push pawn to f6 and escape with their king, but now black is trapped. Whatever move they make, white can just follow with rook to h8, sealing the deal. In typical beginner to intermediate games, your opponent will often take the pawn on d4. At this point, I advise against automatically recapturing, as this would allow your opponent to gain tempo in development. Instead, play the clever move, knight to f3. You still threaten to advance the pawn, and you're also developing your pieces. If black is drawn into taking the pawn on a4, thinking it's a great move and preparing to push pawn to d5 next, you can capitalize on this and continue your attack. Now you can play queen takes d4 and notice the difference. Black has no time to play knight to c6 to defend, because they must protect their knight on e4. Typically, they'll retreat the knight either to f6 or d6. Let's look at both options. If knight to d6 is played, aiming to attack your bishop and gain tempo, simply castle and stay calm. If they play knight to c6, it might look like both of their knights are attacking you, and you might think you need to move the queen or bishop, but here's the twist. Play rook to g1 check. This move signals the beginning of the end for black. They must defend their king, but then you play queen takes g7. Since black no longer has a bishop on f8, this move becomes possible. You then attack the rook, and after it moves, you can finish with bishop to h6. At this point, black is done. They might capture your bishop, the one that initiated the bishop's opening, but this only frustrates you further as you deliver checkmate. I hope you understand all variation. If you think this video is helpful for you, then like and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.